Thank you for listening to Brain Injury Bites. From all of us here, we'd like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hello and welcome to Brain Injury Bites, where we provide help and advice for people after a brain injury. Hi, I'm Ashwini and I'm a trustee at Headway Warrington. I'm also a senior associate solicitor focusing on catastrophic injury, including brain injury.
My name's Brooke and I've lived with a traumatic brain injury since 2007.
So in the last episode, we discussed cognitive problems and we briefly touched upon the effects of socialising. I'd like to discuss that with you a little bit more, Brooke, and think about the effects that you've experienced since your brain injury and how that's impacted on your relationships with your family and your friends. It's also helpful to remember that when we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we've talked about the importance of physiological, talked about safety and security generally. We're now sort of halfway up the pyramid and thinking about the idea of love and belonging and the importance of that to achieving your goals. And friends and family and the interactions that you have with them is really important to the journey. It's probably even more so important after brain injury because that support is really vital to making sure that you can flourish. But I think it's perhaps fair to say that there also has to be an acceptance that those relationships will change because as you adjust to the new you, friends and family will also come to realise that that you are different and that the relationship will be different. So it's about adapting and strengthening those relationships. And we'll also be looking at how it's possible to forge new relationships as well. I'd like to talk to you, though, specifically about your experiences, Brooke. So talk to us, tell us really about how you found socialising after your injury.
I think the first thing to say is that because brain injury is it's an invisible disability and it can be invisible to you as well because you think, particularly I was in my early 20s and I just thought I couldn't see a difference in myself, thought I was going to be totally fine. But my plan was to come out of hospital and just get back to my normal life. I was a student at the time, which was a lot of kind of late nights and socialising, but when you are discharged from hospital, you slowly realise that that's not the case. And you come to realise that you as a person have changed and your relationships with other people have changed. And because essentially it's your brain that's been injured, which makes you, and you are actually a different person, whether you like to admit it or not. And the first time I noticed that something was wrong, I guess all that time I spent in hospital, a lot of it was like planning my, triumphant return to the social world. And I think that's worth noting, actually. It's something that a lot of people have, everybody's in different situations. Everyone's in different scenarios when they have a head injury, aren't they? And a lot of people have normal life, no job, family, and I suppose I had a normal life because I was a student at the time, and I worked, but it was not normal hours. It was I worked in a bar and stuff, and that was like a big part of my life, and that's not necessarily a normal life, but that was the life that I was wanting to get back to. And I used to I still remember sitting in the hospital thinking how I was going to get back to normal life, and I built this image up of how I was going to make this return, how I was going to be this great charismatic guy, and I was going to fit straight back in it. But the first example I can think of was it was arranged that I was going to meet up with some friends again when I've been I think I was still in hospital at the time, but I used to think of it as being like hospital, like prison. I used to get day release. They used to let me out on some days, like weekends and stuff, just to be at home with my family and to get a bit back to normal life. I arranged to meet up with some friends. I used to work on a bar on Deansgate Locks, and it was just a Tuesday afternoon. The quietest time of the week for the bar. The music was on as low as possible. And I suppose that's a situation where everybody else would think, this is a perfect scenario for him because it's going to be nice and quiet, it's going to be easy. But what actually happened was I was sat around the table, and obviously everybody, I've been through this massive thing. Everybody had not seen me for a while, so there was a few people wanting to ask me questions about it, and so I was getting like a few people asking me at once. And also, even though the bar was quiet, the music was on low, there were still other people, and there was still the music on low, and that wasn't something that I was used to in a quiet hospital. So that in itself became overwhelming, and like several people talking to me at once. That's when I came to, like, I don't know what the word is. It's social stimulation or something. That's when the first time I became aware of that, and how it massively had a negative impact on me.
Yeah. Yeah. And did that sort of then change your views on wanting to socialise, or how you were going to socialise?
I suppose there's a big element of denial about it as well. I just thought it was, obviously it did have massive effects on me, but it was, in my head, I just put it down to it was just a one-off, and next time I would be this charismatic person, and then it was the next time, and it was the next time when it happened, a few times, I started to realise that things have changed.
Did it take you a while to accept that things had changed and that you couldn't necessarily be the person that you'd built yourself up to be in your head, this sort of charismatic person that would come in for his triumphant return?
I just kept constantly making up to myself that it would be, this is just a one-off, and it would be all right next time. But when it's like the 10th one-off, it's going to be like a little bit obvious that there's something has changed. And
was that hard for you to accept?
I think, like, emotionally as well as physically. Yeah, physically you have to make changes so that you in fact can get through those times. And having to, I don't know, it's like your pride, isn't it? You do want to, you build yourself up to in your head to be this person, and then you're in fact, you realise that you're not. So
I think it can probably impact on your idea of your self-identity, because you remember what you were like before the accident, and you were probably, as a student, used to going out in big groups and being the life and soul of the party, and going out drinking at all hours and so on. And then from having had that to going to not being able to sit in a bar on a Tuesday afternoon with quiet music.
Yeah, I wouldn't ever claim to have been the life and soul of the party. I could certainly, hack a conversation with several people under loud music, and the fact that you couldn't hack a conversation with 2 or 3 people under extremely quiet music was definitely a jolt to the system.
Yeah. So after those sort of experiences where you kept thinking, oh, this is a one-off, next time, and then you got to a point where it was quite a few of these next times, did you get to a point where you then felt like you wanted to withdraw, that you didn't want to socialise with people?
Yes and no, really. There's yes, because it was just, you kind of you become scared of failure, and you don't want to be like a letdown to people, and then you also want to. There's that fighter in you, isn't there? You want to fight against it, and also denial. It just takes you a long time to accept that you have changed, and there's that. I kept making excuses that was always a one-off, but it probably took me it might even be years to accept that, because I just think I didn't want to admit it.
Yeah. As
well, you don't want to be a hindrance to anyone else as well. You don't want to be seen to hold people back. You want to, like, I guess, contribute to the situation, but you don't want people to. I guess a big thing for me was I didn't want to be seen as being boring, and every time the socializing was such a stress that I would tend to avoid it rather than risk being boring. I would just sit this one out, and then it comes to, you would make excuses to sit this one out, and then you can see how it can be quite easy quite easy to become isolated like that.
And did that sort of impact on your mental health as well?
Yeah, absolutely it did. You don't want to be seen as like somebody who brings the situation down. You'd rather just not be there at all.
But then the isolation can...
Yeah, and the isolation, while it might be a comfort at first that you can stay at home and you don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
You do that a few times and then, you've got good friends that will ask you to come out, but then after a while, if you refuse a situation 5 times, then they're going to stop asking you because you think that's maybe the best thing for you. The kindest thing to do if you don't want to do that.
Did you have any sort of conversations with your friends about how you were feeling and how you were struggling in certain situations?
I don't think I ever did, because I don't think I ever had that conversation with anyone because I didn't really understand myself, what was happening myself, so I couldn't really articulate how I was feeling and how therefore that impacts on social situations. I think a lot of the thing was I just didn't understand it, so I just used to avoid it.
Yeah.
So that was and then obviously a knock-on effect of that was the isolation.
Yeah. And on the occasions that you did go out or tried to go out and struggled, did you find that, for example, that afterwards, let's say you went on a Tuesday afternoon or something, and the next day, did you find that you were even more fatigued for the effort that was put into trying to be present?
Yeah, there's something that you have to learn as well, which is the knock-on effect. But so say if you do something like particularly energetic one day, that will have a knock-on effect for the next day to even 2-3 days.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, couple that with the memory problems that you wake up next day and you forget about that, and then you're just really tired, and you don't really know why. And this is why it's good to write things down, to keep a diary, and if you can be prepared for that. Things I've said to myself several times in the past that I'm gonna write myself a post-it note by the side of my bed saying you're going to be tired today, and times to expect to be tired, but you obviously forget to write that post-it note and you forget to do it. I mean, it's still 15 years on now, I don't do it, and it still happens to me. And
I suppose you also forget that going out takes that little bit more effort, and the next time you're invited and you decide to go, you sort of don't prepare yourself.
Yeah, and you in terms of planning your week, if you do something on the night or the night before, then make sure you don't have anything planned for the next day.
Yeah.
But or at least the morning of the next day, and it's just the fatigue. We've spoke about fatigue in the previous episode, but it does have a massive knock-on effect.
Absolutely, yeah. And you talked about sort of in those earlier episodes of socializing with friends, you had lots of people asking you lots of questions and struggling with that. How did that make you feel? What was going on? Were you struggling to sort of follow conversations? Was it just too much stimulation?
I think a bit of both. I mean, the one thing I've learned about previous from reading it is it's called it's the swimming pool effect. I've not been to a swimming pool for a while, but I remember going when I was younger, and it's like there's a lot of people in there shouting, and there's no soft furnishings to absorb the sound. It's just all hard surfaces, and it's very echoey in a swimming pool, and that's what it's a bit like in your head. It's and it can become quite just overwhelming.
Quite disorientating, I imagine.
Yeah.
And what about the effects of alcohol? I mean, as a student, your sort of natural way of socializing, I guess, was to go out drinking. Did you find that after your brain injury that socializing with alcohol was perhaps more difficult, harder, worse?
As a young person as well, yeah, it's alcohol was a big part of my life. It just has an effect times 10, really. You kind of get it's one of those situations where you try to explain it to people, that alcohol makes me feel awful, but then everyone makes a joke, say, yeah, it makes me feel awful too, especially the next morning. But alcohol, particularly with the, trying to keep track of things, I suppose what it does, it's a depressant, isn't it? It dulls your senses. So especially like trying to speak to a few different people at once, where before it could have made you more confident, now it made me absolutely less confident. And the thing to warn people about if consuming alcohol after a brain injury, it makes you massively vulnerable as well. And brain injury can make you look drunk as well. I remember trying to, because you try and socialise, you're trying to get back to your normal life, but you go out and you're looking like you're enjoying it, but in actual fact, you're absolutely hating it, but you're just kind of being there, and I was there quite a few times because I thought I should be there. And then I remember going to a bar in Scarborough, and I'd not had anything to drink, but the doorman wouldn't let me in because I was like swaying a bit, but because I just had a brain injury, and he wouldn't let me in because I thought I was drunk, but in fact I actually wasn't drunk. But then you don't have the conversational skills to speak to speak up and plead your case.
No. Just whilst thinking about that, I don't know if you're aware of Headway. They have the brain injury card now, and because, like yourself, many other people with brain injuries struggle with, not struggle, but can sometimes appear intoxicated when they're not. They might be swaying, they might have slurred speech, they might not be able to focus. And those are the sorts of things that you could also associate with somebody who's under the influence. But with the brain injury card, you can specify on the card the things that you struggle with. So, it might be that my speech is slurred, and it's a way of telling people that, I'm not acting this way because I'm drunk, but because I have an injury. So not necessarily just for bars, in other situations as well, but it's just handy to know about that.
I think any situation with a brain injury card, I've got one. I don't think I've actually used it, but it's really nice to have in my wallet. I mean, I think I'm 15 years soon past my injury, but certainly there's been plenty of times when I would have liked that, and it's something like official to pull out, and it's not just saying I've got this brain injury, and it just doesn't sound, particularly when you're not like quite as articulate as you were, you can't really voice your opinion properly, particularly when you get stressed as well. When you get stressed, your brain like kind of grinds to a halt, and you can't, the more stressed you are, the less you can speak. And that's when that will come in extremely handy.
Yeah, definitely. Thinking about the other impacts, I guess, of brain injury on socialising, and I think we've touched on this before in another episode about sort of the rigidity of thinking and taking things quite literally. Talk to us about the fancy dress party you went to.
The fancy dress party, it was... So that's something I've mentioned before in writing. My friend Gareth had I think it was his 25th birthday. That was his 25th birthday. And it was a fancy dress party, and the theme was G. So
G for Gareth.
G for Gareth, yeah. So he was a gangster rapper, I think. Another mate, Danny, was Graham Gooch, the cricketer. Mate Graham was a German who had the lederhosen and stuff, and a mullet. And I was a gnome. My sister's like a makeup artist, and she did. So any fancy dress party I've been to, I've always had really good makeup. And my dad had made me it was like a piece of wood, a string with a little fish on the end, and it was like a fishing rod, like a garden gnome would.
Yeah.
And I walked in, and I will put a picture on the website for this. and I'd come in to see my friends, and everybody saw me burst out laughing.
Yeah.
And I remember being really, obviously they were laughing because it was a funny costume and everyone was laughing at each other. I just remember being quite hurt by it. I thought everybody was laughing at me. But I mean, obviously they were laughing at me because it was a costume, wasn't it? But I just didn't get the joke. I took it really literally. And getting back to sense of humour and learning to take a joke has been actually a big thing for me. The first example I can think of was actually in the hospital. I had my phone, and a big thing at the time was sending loads of different jokes to people. And one of my mates had sent me a joke. I think the joke saying was somebody they knew was they were selling venison. It was like, I don't know, for instance, £15 a kilo. Do you think that's deer? And the joke was venison being deer. But and just going to prove that nobody else got this joke, there was like, I think there was 4 guys in my ward, and I had like a bit of a discussion going of whether £15 for a kilo of venison was in fact expensive or not. So I gave him a deadpan straight answer. We thought it was all right, and he thought obviously to him it was a joke, and I didn't get it.
Oh dear. Literally, oh dear. Has that gotten better over time? That you sort of able to understand jokes more and not take things as literally?
I think it's gotten better. Yeah, it's obviously gotten better. Everything gets better, but it's probably not perfect, you know. I'd say it's still effective. It comes down to speed of thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And what about forging new relationships, making new friendships, or even just engaging in small talk with people? How have you found that?
Well, I'm someone that, like, all the time when I was in hospital, when I was at home, when I went back to Scarborough for like a few years, and I always wanted to move back to Manchester, and I always thought I'd make a really good go of it. And to be honest, I've been quite brave in some aspects. Like I've been into town on my own to the living room on Deansgate, and I've been speed dating. And the first I've been speed dating a few times. I just throw myself. I've got this thing where I throw myself into uncomfortable situations and try and get out of my comfort zone. Yeah. That's probably what's like the public speaking's about, because that's not something I would want to do at first neither. But I'm good at forcing myself into situations. But I remember the speed dating. I don't know if to anybody who's never done it, you go. There's a series of tables. There's like, say 10 different girls, and you'd move around after 3 minutes. You'd have this little date. You'd have a chat for 3 minutes, and then you'd move on to the next. And I suppose I went into the first 2 really enthusiastic, and then after the first 2, my energy had totally burned out. And I remember this moment looking up and seeing the rest of the room, and there was like another 10 more dates. No, sorry, there was another like 8 more dates to go on. I thought, oh my God, I can't be doing with this. But I do throw myself in situations, but I can't. Making small talk is I suppose small talk's all right. But I think one thing that got me was where I find I have to plan for little conversations. There was a time when I joined the gym at Parswood at Didsbury, and I used to practice talking to everyone, and I used to go, so I'm quite sort of confident, but I'm confident with no substance. I used to go in, I used to smile, I used to have a chat with the person on the reception, and one thing that he always used to stump me was, what have you been up to at the weekend? And I was just, I don't know, I'd have this visualization that I'd just look back into my memory and that it'd just be completely empty. I can't sort of remember things off the top of my head. Like if somebody prompts me, for instance, like I think it was even the time I did a wing walk, like on, when you're on the top of the plane, and I'd done that on a Saturday, and I think that I'd been into this gym, I think it was on a Tuesday, and said, what have you been up to at the weekend? Just small talk. And I couldn't remember. And I just made some excuse and said I'd done something. I'd done this wing walk. But obviously it was there in my memory, but it's like needs somebody's kind of, It's called prompting. It needs somebody to kind of to push me in, to prompt me of that memory. So if they said, "Do you remember the wing walk?" then I'd be able to talk about it for 10 minutes. But just from cold asking me what I've done, I couldn't remember.
So you've mentioned planning and practicing discussions. Do you sort of plan out before you go to a situation where you might have to engage in small talk?
I say I do, but I don't, due to the memory and the organisational problems that I have. But on a good day, yeah, occasionally I do. Whenever I get asked to do something or a particular date, I'll try and stick it in the diary so I can then have a look back over my calendar over the previous week, look what I've been up to the previous week, and then it would be fresh in my memory and I could have that conversation, that small talk conversation.
Yeah.
I think preparation is so important. I think when you've got a brain injury, you have to be prepared for any situation you can.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. So thinking about help and advice then for our listeners, especially those who might be thinking about socialising after their brain injury and sort of getting them prepared, I guess, for the changes that they might experience. I suppose some tips could be to think about how to socialize and accept that it will be different. So rather than just trying to go back to what you did before, finding somewhere quieter to meet, somewhere, say, I don't know, at home or in a cafe rather than in a busy pub, and thinking about also the time of day. So not doing it in the evening when there are lots of people around, but perhaps earlier in the day when it's not as busy. I know you said that you didn't really talk to your friends and family about it at the time because you yourself struggled to articulate what was going on or understand it. But I suppose we could encourage our listeners to really have those open discussions with their friends and family about what they're experiencing, how they're feeling, what they're struggling with. So to make them understand that, it might not be the best thing to try and go out for an evening meal in a busy pub, but, something a bit quieter with a smaller group. Definitely keeping an eye on alcohol consumption. You talked about how it can make you quite vulnerable and it can be quite a significant depressant. And we know that when someone has a brain injury, these sorts of substances can have much more of an effect on someone. So definitely trying to keep an eye on it. Don't try to match everybody. Try as best you can to know your limits and stick to them. But I think it's important to plan or try to plan ahead. If you know you're going to go out, have a nap. Make sure you're well rested. We've talked about this obviously in the episode dealing with fatigue, but it can't be overstated really, the importance of rest. And I suppose coming back to the idea of knowing your limits, just knowing what you can and can't tolerate, and being prepared to say, I've had enough. I'm tired. I need to go home, rather than just trying to be there, like you said, just being there because you feel you have to be.
I think with any situation you go into, make sure you've got an exit plan as well. So you're not just going into. You don't find yourself in a bar when you might be sat there worried about, full of anxiety about how are you gonna get home, how are you gonna go, how long are you gonna be there for, how long are you gonna be, how long are you gonna be exposed to this for. So I think the best thing to do, talking from experience, there's no substitute for experience as well. But I think I've got to try to be the best version of yourself that you can, rather than, you don't want to be like an exhausted version of yourself. So, although you might be there for longer, you're not going to be,
you're there, but you're not present.
Yeah, you don't want to be there, and I don't think you're not going to be adding much to the situation. So all you're going to be is just there. So to do things in smaller. Small groups, smaller time scales as well. So it's better to be, a much better version of yourself than to
try to do everything at once.
to
Too many people, and
to overwhelm yourself.
And I suppose you could share that exit plan, if you like, with a couple of people that you feel you trust and you feel able to talk to.
Yeah, and
so that they won't be
another
offended.
thing as well. If you're going out drinking as well, there's going to be people who say, "I'll look after you. You know, don't worry about. I'll be fine." But then don't forget, if they're having alcohol, they are going to change once after a couple of pints. So be wary of that as well.
And I think the final thing, which we touched on just before, was planning ahead a little bit as well, being prepared for that small talk. If you're asked questions out of the blue, having however you do it, whether you read your diary beforehand, whether you have a post-it note with some little prompts on, so that if somebody asks you what have you done at the weekend, or you've got a stock answer ready.
Yeah, definitely. That's a theme that runs through everything, I think, is just to be prepared for stuff.
Be prepared, be well rested, be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, there you go. It's a title for you, man. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check the footnotes for more help, advice and resources.
Please don't forget to follow, subscribe and share our content. If you do have any suggestions for topics that you'd like us to cover, why not drop us a line at hi@braininjurybites.co.uk. We'll be taking a small break over the Christmas period and we'll be back on the 4th of January.
In the next episode, we'll be talking about the dangers of comparing yourself to others after brain injury.